Hi, Jessica. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, thank you. Yeah, how are you?
Doing pretty well. It's beautiful here. I don't know what the weather is like there. I'm forgetting my conversion from Fahrenheit to Celsius. I'm being an American right now, but it's like 80 degrees out today and sunny and beautiful here. But for our viewers, this is Jessica Metheringham. Did I say that correctly?
Metheringham. Yep,
Okay.
Metheringham. That's right.
Uh, from north of London, and she's still relatively new to board game design. And she set up Dissent Games in 2019, successfully kickstarting a game. And I just lost it, even though we looked it up beforehand.
Was it Disarm the Base?
Disarm the Base?
Disarm the Base was my first Kickstarter. Yes, it was.
About peace activists doing their thing to help make the world a better place, and is working on her second game. When you wrote back to us, you said you feel more like a political campaigner than a gamer, and you are chair of Unlock Democracy, which is a UK political pressure group calling for a written constitution and generally more transparent democracy.
Yep.
Very happy to get started on some political talk in this too, you mentioned. So we will just see where this conversation takes us. We'll have some fun talking about games and game design. Anything else you want to say as we introduce you here today?
No, but that all sounds cool. I mean, this is just really great to talk about people, especially because a lot of people talk about the surface stuff with game design. But I think actually this is, getting into the deeper bit, the why you're doing stuff, that's what drives me. So I'm really excited to talk to you both.
That's awesome. I mean, we Ryan and I often have very heated discussions afterwards because and this didn't come up in the questions we sent you, but one thing that we have thought a lot about is you did mention this. So I'm going to jump around in the order of the questions. Sorry, this is how our conversations go. But we talk a lot about the democratization of games and how games sometimes can be for a select few, whether it's a excess of time or money or things like that. And you mentioned that. In fact, let's just go there. Let's just start there.
Let's go there.
Yeah.
Going there.
Yeah. So
we're going there.
We talked. We've talked about that, and we asked you the question: where do you hope to see tabletop gaming grow in the next few years? That's something we've talked about with a lot of our guests. So why don't you just start there? And if it gets political, that's fine. We're not going to cut that out. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
Okay.
So the thing is that you asked me that via email. Now I've completely forgotten what I said via email. So I could come up with a completely different answer. Let's see if I'm thinking along the same lines now as I was then. Where would I like to see it go? I mean, from a personal standpoint, then I'd quite like more smaller games. But that's kind of selfish. Part of that is selfish because that's what I really like. This is me making a medium game saying I want more smaller games. So I might be shooting myself in the foot here. But it's just that I am, there are times when I really like a long, immersive gaming experience, but I'm personally just more drawn to the let's whip out a pack of cards, play a few rounds or something, and then, do something else, move on to something else. But I'd also just like more people from other areas to come into it. I don't want this to be an elite hobby for just a few people who are really interested in, say, wargaming or, want to play long immersive things. Though they have their place. Recently, then I just finished Pandemic Legacy Season 2, which I loved. But we were playing it over Zoom, and that was a really interesting experience. I saw the board for the first time the other day when we'd finished it. I played the entire game without seeing the board. Seeing it in real life. I saw it on a phone screen, but seeing it in real life. So,
yeah. What do gaming conventions and gaming groups generally look like in the UK then? Because that's something that we haven't experienced or talked about on our show.
I've barely left Ohio.
So yeah, what do they look like pre-pandemic? We'll say, because right now obviously everything's different, and how would you hope them maybe to look different in I don't know, maybe in terms of like where games are played or how people get invited into the hobby? Because you kind of mentioned that. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's all Games Workshop over there, right? Like
there is a big Games Workshop element.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a huge Games Workshop element. I mean, Warhammer is now in Nottingham.
Right.
But so, I think a lot of things around there do tend to be miniatures based. I mean, I think, so the biggest one that I've tended to go to has been the Games Expo, which is in Birmingham, which is really nice. That's got a really good feel. So it's a bit like, I've not been to a US one. I have been to Essen, which I loved. So Games Expo feels a bit like Essen, but kind of smaller and slightly less professional, but in a really good way. A kind of, this is just people rocking up with bits of paper. There were definitely a couple of prototypes that I play tested there, which were literally things scribbled on the back of Post-it notes. But, there's a real place for that. And I love those sort of things. Yeah. But I'm really hoping to go to a few more. We used to have a play testing group that I went to probably went regularly for about 6 to 9 months. And, that was great because it was within walking distance where I was. And it was the first Monday of every month, I think, at, our friendly local game shop. And that was really good to go to. But I must say the thing that I really liked best of all of the games events, things I liked best, and this is a very niche market, was the games events that our local game shop did on a Wednesday lunchtime for people with babies. You brought in your baby, you put your baby down with the other babies, and you played something really simple where you could just, play something where you didn't have to think about it. And, they had foam mats and things, and, the kids would be crawling around. And that was so good.
That sounds...
I would go to that.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds nice. We both have kids, and we know what it's like to try to focus.
Nothing makes watching your kids easier than other kids, for the most part.
Oh, yeah.
Then you're just listening mostly for loud things and looking over frequently. But if there's not other kids there, then you are the entertainment.
Yeah, exactly.
They're like, what are you playing?
Let me touch this. So, yeah, we just had to make sure that they, that we weren't playing anything with really small pets. Because if you've got a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old wandering around, mainly they'll be, chasing each other, which was what mainly happened. But then they'll suddenly go, oh, hang on, small shiny things, and start trying to swallow them.
Yeah, I used to work at a game store, and that was probably the hardest part. Is we had like marbles and tumbled rocks and things like that, making sure that like parents knew where those things were, so that the little kids didn't grab them and eat them.
I played a game with Hot Wheels. Try telling your 5-year-old that they can't touch them.
Yeah.
Oh no, that's so tricky.
It was a very, very rough evening.
So, how did you? Was it at that play group that you thought of the idea for your first game, or how did that come up?
So I've been playing games, just as a hobby, pretty much since I left university, which is getting further and further away now as the years go on. So I played a lot of Carcassonne, for example. Carcassonne was the one that was really what we played. And then about 2 years ago, then I had this chance to do freelance work, to move from a full-time job. I mean, basically, my partner at the time was working a part-time job, and now he's working a full-time job. And that, basically he got a really good job opportunity where we then thought, okay, well, maybe I can move into more freelance work, which then hopefully would create a bit of a space to do this. Mm-hmm. Plus, of course, one of us has to be looking after the children because they're nearly 5 and nearly 3 now. So they're still quite little.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So then with all that work and going, yeah, I'm going to go freelance and, more time to look after the children. What I thought was, clearly I need to make a board game because with all that free time I don't have. But the idea was actually this direct action that my friends took. So it's people I know who snuck into a military base to protest against the fact that the warplanes there were being sent. Now, in this case, they were being sent to Yemen. So they were like, actually, we're going to do this direct action. This is a protest. They obviously got caught. That was kind of the point of the protest. That they had to get caught. They got a trial. They got acquitted from the trial, which was lovely. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Really good for for the peace movement. But I thought, hey, there are loads of people who are really interested in this, and this feels like it could be a really good board game. Why don't I take these two bits of my life? Because I've been a social justice campaigner for, quite a while. So it was part of my job, and it's something I've been involved in. So I was like, why don't I take these two bits of my life and just see what I can make out of them? This could be really interesting. And yeah, it was a great project. Kickstarted it successfully, which was lovely. Still have a few copies left, but that's mainly because this last year we didn't get to go to conventions and things.
Yeah.
We had plans to have a stall, and we were thinking maybe we could decorate our stall with placards and things, but of course didn't happen because of COVID. So
right.
Would mugshots of your friends be poor taste or great taste for decorating your stall?
Ooh, I think they'd be great taste.
I thought too, but I have a poor judgment of taste at times.
Well, they're so one of them. One of them I think really likes to get out and talk about it a lot. But that's because they're peace activists and they're protesters, and they're like, yeah, let's spread the word. The other one did it wearing his clerical uniform, so he's an ordained Methodist priest. So so he was breaking in there with the dog collar on, which is quite a thing, I think.
Nothing but respect for that.
Yeah. So would you explain just real quickly direct action for those who aren't familiar with the term?
So direct action is generally a protest which goes beyond the normal, the normal bounds of, say a march or something, So when you're saying, okay, we dislike this thing, we want to protest against this thing, then, the majority of people would say, right, let's go hold a march, or, let's go stand outside something, let's have a vigil, get some placards together, some sort of demonstration. Direct action would be taking it a step further, where you're saying, we are going to specifically and carefully break the law.
Yeah.
Which is why that game comes with a disclaimer at the front.
Don't get caught.
I missed the trick there, didn't I?
It comes with a disclaimer. I didn't notice that part. We looked it up on BGG, Board Game Geek, but I didn't see the disclaimer. What is the disclaimer?
No, the front of the rules booklet just has a little thing saying that we respect the right to protest, but we are not encouraging people to actually go and do this particular protest.
Oh, okay.
And it also says not that anybody should ever think this, but it says this is a hypothetical base. This is not the map of a real base. Not that anybody would mistake it for that, because it's a very stylized,
right?
But yeah.
Did you begin writing this during the legal proceedings against your friends, or was it after the resolution? And then follow up to that, if it was during, was it a little touchy at times, where you're like, ugh?
No, it was. So I think the moment when I really thought, yeah, this could be a really good game, was when they got acquitted. So I'm at work, and So one of them was actually a colleague of mine at the time. I'm at work, and this sort of cheer goes round the office. Everyone's like, Sam got acquitted, Sam got acquitted. You see people sort of running back and forth going, oh, we got to say, Sam got acquitted. And so, yeah. So it was that kind of groundswell that I thought, oh, that's quite cool. That could be something interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that elation, yeah, that's pretty cool. So what are some of your, we'll move from there to what are some of your favorite gaming experiences, and then hopefully we'll get to your new game here in a second. Well, go ahead, and then I'll throw something in. Yeah, what are some of your favorite gaming experiences?
Ooh, my current favorite gaming experiences. So at the moment, so like I said, recently played Pandemic Season 2, which was, we really loved. I know Season 2 gets a little, some people love it, some people are less impressed. But for me, it was just perfect, actually. Yeah, towards the end of it, I was a bit like, oh, I can see how this story is developing. Let me try to work out which direction it's going to go in. No spoilers, obviously, but I was like, I don't know how it's going to end. Is it going to be this or this? And I had like 10 different scenarios I was thinking through. So, yeah, really got involved in that. Currently, then I'm really enjoying Terra, which is the one about caving. So I really like that. That's another cooperative game. And we normally play it just with 2 players. But because it's a cooperative game, then the 2-player game is actually with 4 characters. Mm-hmm. But it seems to work really well, which I did not expect, but it did. And I'm thinking most recently, then I've actually been playing a really tiny game. So we got a set of tiny games on, well, not tiny games, but very small games. We've got a set on Kickstarter. So I've been playing Mountain Goats, which I think is board game tables.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, that's really cool. But classic games, to be honest, sometimes I just go back to a pack of cards. Okay. My dad really, really likes playing rummy, and there are times when you're like, let's just sit down and let's just play that, rummy or whist or something. And yeah, there's something classic about saying, let's just, play something quite traditional.
Do you play rummy with your spouse? Partner?
Sometimes. Yeah. So yeah, we're married, but because we're in the UK, we tend to say partner. It's a very sort of middle class UK thing, I think.
Fair. Do you do 500 or do you do a perpetual count?
500 generally. See, I'm glad you asked that question, because a lot of people are like, no, play the classic rummy, but I'm like, no, 500, 500 it is.
Yeah.
How would you, since you like playing card games, how would you explain what taking a trick is in a game? I saw this debate on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, and it really piqued my interest because some people, I think like Jeff Engelstein and others, were like, you don't need to define that. I might be getting wrong which side of the debate he was on, but it was a full-on debate for a little bit. How would you define taking a trick, and if you needed to put it in a rule book, what would you say about it?
That is a difficult one, actually, because it's one of those things that just comes so instinctid to a lot of people. Right. You've played it for a while, you're like, yeah, of course, you do this. I think I'd start with a standard pack of cards. Clearly you can have, taking a trick with multiple card games. It doesn't need to be a standard pack of cards. But I'd say, okay, taking a trick is where you all put one into the middle. You choose what card from your hand you're going to put into the middle. The numbers count up, the suits count up, and one suit you've decided will trump the lot of them. And you are generally trying to be the highest, but sometimes you're trying to be the lowest. I think that's what I'd say. Something like that.
Yeah, sure. I didn't prepare you for that question, so don't feel bad.
That seems a little bit lengthy, though. But the thing is that I'm not, that great at the elevator pitch. So
I think a lot of people are struggling with that too, because so many people they just play the games intuitively, where they're whatever their card game is, whether it's Pinochle or whatever that they're used to, and then they come to it and they're like, how do I explain what I'm doing to somebody who's never done this before? Yeah.
Well, trick taking it's a rule, but it's also like, it's how you would describe certain games. So like, while it's a rule of a game, and rules usually have a description, but since it's its whole game, Rummy is a trick taking game. People are like, oh yeah, I know how to play Rummy. So why would you ever have to describe it, except for all of the people that don't know how to play Rummy?
Yeah. Or the person you're sort of like, how do you do this or that when it's something that's well established?
Right.
One of the things I struggled with, because I did have this for Disarm the Base, was defining what I called the hidden hand. So when you lay 4 cards face down on the table, and then you put 4 cards face up on the table, and you can only reveal the card underneath when you've used the card on the top. So, which is, again, it's standard for, some games. There's a particular game we play in the UK, which I'm not going to say because it's got a rude name, very popular among students, which probably has all sorts of other names, but it's one of those ones where, quite often you have games where you have cards which are hidden on the table, and you can only reveal them once you've used the one on the top.
So, coming to your current game, then, how has all that, your favorite gaming experiences, your political activism, your last game design, how has that informed your current game design? What's going well there for you? Let's just talk about that, right? Because you're trying to get ready for. Sorry, I'm pulling up my notes here.
That's okay.
July,
Library
right?
Labyrinth. July. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, at this point, you're probably completely done with all your game design, right? It's just getting the production stuff done. Right. Oh.
Well, it's the production stuff, but it's also the prototype. Okay. But also the thing is that, you're never quite completely done. You think something is done, and then you play test it with a different group of people, and they go, "Oh, that bit didn't work," or whatever, and you think, "Oh no, we need to switch this out or that about." But it is very much the tweaks. It's saying, okay, does that need a big boss monster at the end, or does it need 2 smaller boss monsters? What actually works? It's that kind of thing. But yeah, sometimes there's a point you just have to say, "Hey, this game is done. I'm going to stop tweaking it," because otherwise you'll just go on forever. But Library Labyrinth is a sort of mid-weight, fairly lightweight, gateway type game, which is about famous fictional women plus historic women. So you're building this team of characters, who are all real characters in some way. You can go and look them up somewhere else. Some of them will be fictional, some will be real life people. But you're building this team to put literary horrors back in the books. So you're in a library, things have started escaping from the books. You've got Dracula over there, maybe. You've got Mount Doom over there in the corner. You've got Martian robots from War of the Worlds. You've got a basilisk over there. Trifford's behind you. You're like, okay, we have to put these things back in the books before they escape and go elsewhere. So you're collecting these book characters. So it's a little bit of, it's not quite set collection, but you are collecting the various characters because they all have specific skills which will help you to put these things back. So we've kind of been thinking about it sometimes like it's a diceless dungeon crawler almost. There's no dice. Yeah. So it's not like you're somebody who's building up your skills. You're basically assembling this, this crack team. So yeah.
I like it.
Yeah. I could tell in your email responses you mentioned Forbidden Island, and I could tell some of the influence there from Forbidden Island for Forbidden Desert. I watched one of your playthroughs using Tabletop Simulator. I like what's going on. What draws you to co-op games of this type then? Because you've mentioned a couple of, I mean, you mentioned Subterra too and Pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah. What draws you to that type of experience?
So I think,
especially
I mean, co-op games, especially as a designer, co-op games are definitely where I'm at the moment. I mean, there is, to be honest, that selfish thing about what do you want to play? You know, so I'm like, hey, actually, you know, that's what I prefer playing. I mean, right now, maybe in a few years' time, I might be back to, you know, some of the more competitive ones. Though tile laying games are something else that I really enjoy. You know, you've probably gathered that from the Carcassonne and the Subterra. You know, really like Alhambra. You know, it's a classic, but you know, I actually really like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the cooperative gameplay really appeals to me because firstly, you know, you are working together as a team, which is something that I am not instinctively good at in real life. You know, I am one of those people who's like, okay, I've got to carry a mattress up some stairs. I will deliberately make sure that I have it delivered for a time when nobody else is in, so nobody has to see me doing that. You know, it's that kind of, which is a real life story. It has happened. You know, but it's that kind of thing where, you know, some people are really, really good at, you know, working as a team. You know, they're good at sports and things, you know, and I'm less good at that. But I think for that reason, co-op games stretch me a little more. You know, perhaps they're a little bit more roller coaster because I have to go, ooh, you know, how can we work together? What is actually going to happen? How are we going to do that?
Mm-hmm.
But then the flip side, you know, I think probably my favorite childhood game when I was younger was Cluedo, Clue to you.
Oh, yeah.
You know, which of course is a very hidden, you know, lots of hidden information. So, yeah.
How do you prevent the quarterbacking element? I mean, rather, other than just excluding somebody from your group, how do you prevent that in the way that you design the game?
I mean, that is really difficult. You know, it is.
Yeah.
And we were thinking about that because our original prototypes, well, you know, the original thought, you know, say back in January or so, was let's have it a really cooperative game. Let's lean into this and say, hey, we recognize the alpha gamer problem. You know, we recognize that people will try to quarterback. And let's just say, look, this is a game where, you know, we want you to recognize that and therefore it won't happen. And that was a mistake because that completely did not happen. I mean, with some players, you know, you had that and they were like, oh, yeah, okay, I understand. Because for a while we had no turns really belonging to any person. You know, it was like, you know, that a player token rotated and that player had a veto, but they could move the other player's pieces, you know, and that could happen for any turn. And that definitely, you know, when you got a certain type of person, then that completely threw it out the window. And I was like, okay, we have clearly not solved that problem. But, you know, we kind of knew that anyway. So what we have at the moment is we have not quite a split turn, but we have for every turn that a player has, and it goes around in the normal way, then you've got 6 actions you can play on your turn. You have to take 3 of them yourself, but you can choose to move other players for the other 3. So it's as if you all have whatever the pandemic power is. You know, which one is it? The administrator who does that? You know, there's one of the characters in Pandemic who does it anyway. You know, so it's as if you all have that power.
Okay.
But yeah, and we found that did help, because it meant that players were more willing to move the other players' pieces when they hadn't been quarterbacking.
Mm-hmm. Mm. No, I like that. I mean, you had a lot to pick from all your characters and everything. How do you pronounce the poet priestess who is in your artwork that you're showcasing the game for?
So I have to have a run up at this one. I think it's think it's Henhudwana.
Okay, that's why. That's why I was asking, because I looked at it and I was like, I'm going to forget how to pronounce this.
We need to have a pronunciation guide on it, in fact. So yeah, because it's a really funny syllable in the middle. But we looked it up and somebody was saying it. But it's harder for me because words which start with a vowel are always harder for me. I had a really bad speech impediment when I was younger, and it stuck with me in just really that regard, that names and things that begin with a vowel are a little bit difficult, which is obviously why I married somebody whose name begins with a vowel.
Of course, right?
Yeah. This is the sensible choices we make in life.
And now I'm thinking about a lot, but no, you pronounced it great. I would have butchered it completely. So, how did you decide which characters to include among all these different women and non-binary people? Because you had a lot to choose from, and I think, at least to me, it would probably feel like when you choose one, you're definitely probably excluding somebody else. So how did you go about that process of deciding these are the important ones for my game?
So, to a certain extent, we haven't chosen them all.
Okay.
The lists have not been nailed down. They're not set in stone yet. We do have probably a core of about, so we're saying we're going to have 100. We've got a core of probably about 50 or so who we're saying, actually, these characters, we thought about who they are. We've balanced the skills carefully with the horrors, so that when you've got the level 1, monsters and things that come out, because a lot of them are not monsters. There's the Forest of Thorns, which is sort of, a Sleeping Beauty type thing, but that's not a monster as such, not in the way that, that Cerberus, is a monster. So we've got those, we've got some of them which are very much balanced, and then we need to decide on the rest, because we have a long list which is just like this. It's this amazing long list, and it's got so many people on them. But we also really want to make sure that whatever list we finally end up with, that is a list which is relatively balanced across the world. I mean, this game will have, for a start, we can't use fictional characters which are still in copyright. So that basically means 70 years from the death of the author. So things written in about 1910 are normally okay. 1920 is often okay. 1940, you're pushing it, generally.
A lot of Conan characters recently just became copyright approved.
Well, there we go.
I can think of 0 female characters from Conan stories. But
I don't know that you'd want, Conan is...
What a rich time for writing fantasy, 1920s.
Well, it's really interesting. You look through some of those, stories, and Tarzan, for example. Did you know there were about 20 Tarzan books?
Yes.
And they're all the same, apart from the first one. Yeah. Practically.
Well, you said the Forest of Thorns wasn't a big bad guy, but in the original Sleeping Beauty story, how she was awoken, I would say that Prince Charming was a pretty bad guy.
Yeah. Certainly in a version that I read. Yeah, at least one version I read. True Love's Kiss is not him, but the baby latching.
Yeah.
It's like, that's When we get to some of the big, the bigger, badder horrors, some of them are not really. Well, some of them are quite meta. We've got doubt in there. Plague is in there. Nightmares, which nightmares to me is really the Island of Dreams from Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
Okay.
So yeah, they get there and they think it's the Island of Dreams, and that's what they've been talking about, and actually what it means is that it's the Island of Nightmares, the bad dreams. But there's something else I was going to say. Oh, yes, about trying to balance it across the world.
Yeah.
Because so we are from the UK. We're all British. We do have, we're a team. There are 5 of us in the team at the moment. We have very mixed heritages. So we've got one person who's British Chinese. We've got one person who's British Caribbean. But so this library will, will probably have more characters from the UK, because that's what we've been reading. That's where our literary roots are.
Mm-hmm.
But we also have the thing where we're trying to balance it across the world. We don't want this to be a very white, very middle class library because, well, firstly, that's no fun, but also that that kind of excludes the great literary traditions out there, particularly if you're thinking about the Japanese literary tradition, the Chinese literary tradition, and they have classics that go far beyond, far deeper than the European classics.
Yeah.
Which is why it's great to have someone on the team who has that history and that knowledge and can tell us, which characters are which and, why we should be representing this character with this and not that.
Yeah. That's awesome. Do you have... how do I put this without getting too heady? Ryan tells me I get too heady sometimes.
No.
One of my favorite short stories, of course, I can't think of the name right now, but Kafka, right?
Mm-hmm.
And do you have anything like that where the horror is the modern sense of self and doubting self and defeating that? Do
you mean, should we have a giant dung beetle in there?
Well, no, that's just allegory, right?
You're thinking more of the trial.
Right. Because, you mentioned like nightmares and fear and totalitarianism. And but that, especially this last year, that's a pretty big deal for a lot of people. That's a huge monster of dealing with myself and existence.
Yes.
So,
self-doubt and anxiety. That is...
Yeah.
But it's, so the answer is definitely want to get something in there about that. We've been talking to the Mary Seacole Trust, which is a UK charity. They have a youth council, which is great, by the way. Should you ever want to know how your game works or whether it makes sense or whatever, go and talk to a bunch of teenagers. Really nice, polite teenagers, but still, they're teenagers and you're like, oh, okay, right. How do I explain this to these teenagers on Zoom? So we've been talking to them and they have been, they picked up really upon some of the horrors being things like doubt. They were saying, oh, yeah, things like anxiety, that's a thing. Can we lean into the mental health aspect? Which was really interesting because it was not quite a side thing, but it was less important to us. And we were thinking, oh, they've picked up on that. That's fascinating. You've picked up on this. Clearly, we should lean into this.
Well, I just like, have you played Obscurio at all?
I haven't, actually. No, I haven't.
Oh, okay. So it's semi-co-op in terms of the fact that it was the follow-up to Mysterium. Have you played that one?
Yes, I do love Mysterium.
Okay, so I like Obscurio slightly better. Obscurio, you're in a library, you're trying to escape a sorcerer who's trapped you there, and then one of your teammates is working with the sorcerer to keep you there.
I have had this described to me before. Now you say it, I'm like, oh, yes.
Okay. Well,
but I haven't played it.
Okay. And maybe it would be helpful. Maybe it wouldn't. But like, as I saw you playing your game, it reminded me of that in terms of like setting. That here are these things that are surrounding. I don't know. I have a vivid imagination. Here are these things that are surrounding me, and how do I say this? That I have to defeat them both internally and externally, and that's what I thought of when I saw your game. So
I think you're just focusing on Star Wars a lot. Isn't that what he does when he has to fight himself in like the...
Oh, in the tree? Oh my goodness. See, I wasn't even going to Star Wars at all. Okay, anyways. All right, so back to your game. What is the biggest, and more a practical question, what is the biggest challenge with game design or production that you've had so far?
So logistics can be pretty challenging, actually. Working out when things need to be done. You know, you're saying, okay, so we need the artwork in order to tell people about this. But then we need the mechanics, and that also feeds into the artwork because we're not entirely sure how many of those cards we're going to need. Then we need prototypes, and we need them by this date so people can play it. But hey, we haven't quite finished doing that bit, so how can we have that bit done? So it's that kind of timetabling of it, which is really tricky. And I completely see how people can just let a game, you know, let the development stage go on forever and ever and ever, because it is so tempting to do that. We're probably going out to Kickstarter, I mean, definitely much earlier than many people would. You know, we're going out and we're saying we haven't got a fair number of artwork, bits done. You know, we've got some of the characters, we've got the boards, but there's a lot of characters we haven't even touched in terms of artwork. And so I think, a lot of people would perhaps say, oh, hang on, this feels half finished. To which the reply is, well, yeah, it is half finished. It's because we're trying to kickstart it. But yeah, it's just trying to get all those things to line up. That, I think, is probably the biggest challenge. That and finding time when the children are sleeping or doing something else are always tricky.
In your response, you also mentioned that you learned to draw. What was that like?
I have learned to draw. I have learned to draw. I have bought myself Procreate, and I've been learning to draw on there. And it's really interesting because I haven't drawn anything properly for years. A few things here and there. My line drawings have always been fairly okay, but there's always been a lot of rubbing out first. Whereas, of course, now, drawing on an iPad, it's like, oh, that's easy. I don't have to make lines. I don't have to do multiple drafts. I can just redo it. So, yeah, it's been really interesting, actually. Starting relatively small, but yeah, sort of building up to some of the, to drawing books. The backs of the cards will probably have my artwork on. The logo is actually mine, and there are a lot of things. I'm looking at that now, and I'm thinking, now that I know some of the stuff that you can actually do in this program, I'm like, oh, okay, I can do that. I did lots of things I did the long way round.
Mm-hmm.
But this is not a show about Procreate.
This week's sponsor. No.
Today we're sponsoring.
Yeah, sponsors. Yeah. So, what have you learned about working as a team? You mentioned some of your teammates and working with them. You mentioned to us in your written response that it's more than just a designer having a thought and then getting an artist to do it. Do you want to tell us more about that process?
Yeah, I mean, that's always been the case, I think. Or at least, I think when a designer so when the designer is working well with the artist, then that is definitely feeding back and there's a loop in there. Certainly when I was doing Disarm the base, there were only two of us there, me and the artist. So me and Mark. And it was really interesting because he'd come up with things and I'd be like, ooh, does that work? And then I'd be like, right, how about like this? And then he'd send something and I'd be like, ooh, yeah, that really works. There were things to do with the floodlights, because you've got little floodlight tiles in that game, which you flip over and suddenly, there's this big orange tile there on the board. And that is something that just works so much better than I imagined it would work when I was thinking of it. But with this team, there are more of us. There's also more that I'm thinking about as well, because there are things which I am not good at. And one of them is marketing. We had a big marketing meeting, the other week. We were all sort of, meeting on Zoom and saying, right, we've got this thing, right, what do we do? How do we do this? And really, I realized that my instincts in marketing were quite different to some of theirs. We had actually loads of different people in the room, really. There were 4 of us, I think, on that call, and we had 4 different opinions about things, which can be really useful when you can lean into that and say, okay, let's use this. What does this actually mean? Because there are things which just are not instinctive to me. The elevator pitch is not instinctive. You're probably discovering that from the amount I'm waffling. But also the other thing that was really non-instinctive to me was newsletters via email, just because that's not something I do very much. And I'd been doing an occasional blog, which had been sent out to people via email, but I hadn't been promoting that at all, because why would anybody want an email about something? But some people love emails, so it's just one. Yeah.
I've been recently reading my emails more that I've gotten, which is new.
Well,
because I only have like 20,000 unread emails.
So people are responding well to your newsletters, though.
Yeah.
Good.
I mean, they do like it. People like the Facebook group as well. But again, that's often about the types of audience, and some of that's about generational stuff, because Facebook is at a particular, quite a wide generational reach, but it's not the teenagers. The teenagers are not so much on Facebook.
Yeah. So are you using TikTok or what else are you doing with your marketing then?
We haven't stepped onto TikTok. We are doing, so there's some of Instagram, some of Twitter, and some of Facebook. And we've basically gone, let's use those 3 platforms plus a website, which is basically a landing page plus newsletters.
What's the website?
LibraryLabyrinth.com.
There we go.
Yep.
There you go. See, you are better at marketing than I am. You are definitely better at marketing than I am.
And then what you do is you go, hey, Christopher, you're probably going to put that on the screen, right?
LibraryLabyrinth.com? Yes, I am. Yep.
Yeah, of course you are. See? You have far better marketing instincts than I do.
So you talked a little bit about being careful with how you depict characters and all that. So do you have people on your team that are... You mentioned to us when you responded to us that you have cultural and identity consultants. Are they on your team, or are you also bringing on additional people in addition to those that are currently on your team?
We'll be bringing on some additional people. We're speaking to people about specific cultures, because while we as a team can cover some of the world, it's by no means all of the world, we'll be speaking to people about specific characters, from their culture. And we'll also be speaking about some which are less geographical. So, for example, this game, so there will be trans women involved in this game, which is something where we need to get somebody who is a trans woman themselves to say, does that look right to me? Now, of course, this is all going to be personal. This is all, quite subjective, but it's still really important that we get, multiple subjective perspectives on it rather than just saying, oh, yeah, it looks fine to me, because that's not a recipe for success.
Right.
That's valid. I've looked into designing before and representation, and with classes that I'm familiar with and stuff like that, or people, and I'm just, I get worried about it, but it's very valid to just get a lot of different viewpoints because it is very subjective per the individual.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how will you deal, because it's hard sometimes, how will you deal with cultures that are essentially dead now? Like, because
we can't get somebody from Mesopotamia.
Yeah,
you can't get somebody from Mesopotamia.
Yeah, you can't get an Akkadian to come out or a Babylonian to give you their input on it. So how does that go?
That's very true. I mean, to a certain extent, we can get a historian to do that. So we are talking to a couple of history teachers as well.
Okay.
To say, oh, okay, does this look like it should look? But yeah, so there are some experts who are not from that culture because that culture no longer exists, which hopefully should, cover as much as we can.
Yeah, no. I mean, you're doing a lot more than some bigger companies have done. Unfortunately,
we're trying. Yeah.
But I mean, that's the only thing to do is laugh at this point because some of them have been just doing whatever they want willy nilly. So
I have one question that I've been pondering about the game.
Yeah.
I assume. See, this is one of those. This is kind of a joke. I assume since you will have expansive representation of all these different cultures, that the library is in Britain, right?
It's yeah. I mean, should we have a little sign at the top of some of them that says "stolen from"? There we go. We'll come with little stickers. In fact, not stolen. Yeah, stolen from ... and you can write in your own thing about where we stole it from. There you go. Will that be a stretch goal? Maybe.
I would throw in to make sure that one got met extra.
Yeah.
Donated
donated with air quotes.
Legally, we don't have to return this one. We are custodians now.
Yeah. But these are not necessarily first edition books. You may well be having, someone coming out of, a book which has got many representations. Who says that you can't have 50,000 Joan of Arcs coming out in different libraries across the world, from your history section. That would be something to see. Maybe, in fact, there is a skill that some of the cards have that they can mimic another card. So yeah, you do in effect have two Joan of Arcs or two Lady of Shalotts or whatever. So yeah.
I'm excited. This is something I wish that I was recording at home so that I could have my daughter wave, as we said beforehand. And then I get hyped up when the game's on Kickstarter. Easier sell for the family to throw some bones at it.
Is it going to be available in the US?
We very much hope so. I mean, yes, it will be. So we don't yet know how exactly we're going to be fulfilling the game. We might, supposing that there are 500 copies made, then we'd be doing it from the UK. Supposing that 500 people want to buy it, we'd be getting the whole lot delivered here from wherever. With Disarm the base, I actually took that from multiple places. We had the main game made in China, and then we had lots of the components were put in afterwards. So that all got delivered to my spare room and shipped out by yours truly. And that was a very long few weeks back in December 2019. It's possible, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah.
But supposing that it's more than about 500, then we'll be looking at something else, fulfillment straight from somewhere else, which would make it slightly easier for the US.
Yeah, fair. Just real quick, and we can end on this or something else if you want to add something else. But how do you integrate sustainability into what you're doing? Is that easy to do? Is that difficult to do in Britain, especially with Brexit now happening and everything else? How? I mean, is it even possible? Yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, we have looked around for people who make boards here in the UK. And I've found one person who makes, who makes enough for prototypes, but doesn't do large scale production. It's actually really difficult to domestically produce boards, which means obviously after this, I am just going to be making card games. So there are some bits which do really need to come from somewhere else. And I'm not quite sure where they'd come from. It may be China, it may be somewhere else. To a certain extent, you can cut down on the plastic. You can say, let's have wooden meeples. Let's not have little plastic minis. Let's go for cardboard components. Let's not go for a plastic insert. There are little things which make little differences. You can also factor in more time for it to be shipped rather than brought by plane. Some people do bring by plane, particularly for the smaller quantities. Supposing it's only, 500 or 1,000 copies of a game, then it's perfectly possible for it to go by plane. But, that is definitely less environmentally friendly than sending it on a ship, which takes much longer. But, yeah, to a certain extent, you've just got to say, okay, right, this is something which will cost some carbon. And yeah, that's difficult. It's difficult to square. We're trying to reduce it, but it is sometimes a little tricky.
I mean, the hope, right, is that you're creating a game that people will enjoy for years and years and make it more worth it than something that they're going to play for only a little bit of time, right? So
yeah, absolutely. The other thing, which actually I found with Disarm the Base, was that I made sure to go for a factory where they were reassuring me that it was all made there rather than somewhere where it was made elsewhere. Yeah. And, that is because, there are concerns about, who is making the game.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, we'd very much like to have things made by companies which have unionization, which I think is not as common in the States as it is here. I mean, most people are members of unions here. I've been a member of a couple of unions in different jobs, and it's kind of expected in many roles. So, yeah.
Private workforces in the United States, only 7% of them are unionized, whereas I think it's 33% of public sector jobs are unionized here.
Yeah.
Wow. That sounds really low. I don't know.
I work in a union field, and I can't even join my union.
It's harder to join a union for a lot of fields in the U.S. than it is to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah. It's hot garbo, man.
On a fun note, on a fun light note, I enjoyed the color selections that I'd seen so far for Library Labyrinth for the meeples. I always prefer wooden meeples anyway, so that was cool to see.
Excellent. A vote for wooden meeples, yay!
Yep.
So we'll have to make sure that they work for different color blindnesses, for example. And definitely for Disarm the Base. Then we found that by making the green more of a sage green, then it kind of made it a different color completely to the red for most forms of color blindness, which was really interesting. It was funny what sort of small changes you can make, because it was clearly green, for me, right. But it just changed the color completely for other people.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? Getting outside of your own view of the world. And yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anything else you want to share? We really appreciate your time. Thanks for talking about Library Labyrinth and Dissent games and everything you're doing. This is your chance.
Well, maybe I should just get better at marketing. I should say, come join our Facebook page. We have a community page where we're doing all sorts of artwork things. Mainly you get to choose what extra bits I put on the boards next. Jess, put a globe in this room. Jess, put some, a chess set in this room, etc. Jess, make the chairs blue. So yeah, come join our Facebook group and you can make all sorts of exciting decisions like that.
Fantastic.
I like that.
Cool. Well, thank you.
Excellent.
Appreciate your time, and
look forward to it.
Yeah, I really hope it does well. Do you have a date in July that it starts, or just July?
think I might have put July the 5th on the Kickstarter, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, fair enough. We'll share it again on our different channels when we see the date announced for sure and all that. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely talking to you.
Enjoy talking to you too. Thanks.
Thank you.